On the day when joy was supposed to bind a family together, one silent glance tore it apart. The church bells in North Carolina rang with triumph as Aaron prepared to marry. The town gathered to celebrate the son they admired. White flowers lined the aisles. The choir rehearsed its hymns, and the cameras clicked in eager anticipation. But in the middle of this carefully staged celebration, his twin brother Jamie stood with a secret pressed deep in his chest. Hidden behind the polished suit and the polite smile was a truth he could no longer contain. His eyes betrayed him. They lingered on Adrian, the best man, longer than any brother should. They softened in a way that revealed more than friendship. And in that unguarded moment, everything shattered. Their father saw it first. A proud preacher who built his life on sermons of righteousness. He recognized the kind of gaze he had spent decades condemning from the pulpit. His face tightened, his jaw clenched, and the warmth of the occasion froze into cold fury. He stormed toward Jamie, his voice rising over the music, calling him an abomination in front of the congregation. The wedding guests gasped, unsure whether to look away or stare. Aaron, dressed in his groom's suit, stepped forward, his eyes wide with rage rather than brotherly concern. He accused Jamie of shaming him on the most important day of his life, of dragging disgrace into the sanctuary. Jamie opened his mouth to defend himself, but no sound came. The weight of rejection fell faster than he could summon words. His mother's hand, once tender, now pushed him back. The guests whispered, some crossed themselves. And before he understood what was happening, Jamie was forced outside, the doors of the church closing behind him like a final judgment. Inside, the celebration continued, but his name was erased from the photographs, his face deliberately left out of the story the family wanted to tell. He walked down the steps alone, the sound of music fading behind stained glass windows, carrying only the sting of humiliation. What was supposed to be a day of union became the day he was cut away. And as he stood on the empty street, the confetti fluttering at his feet was not for him. It was for a brother who would never again call him family. That day marked the beginning of exile, but it also planted a seed, hidden under the ashes of shame, that would grow in ways no one in that church could imagine. Sometimes the very moments meant to silence you become the force that shapes your voice. And this is where his journey begins. If this story already moves you, make sure you follow Heartstorie, because what comes next will not just challenge a family's pride, it will challenge the very meaning of love, forgiveness, and truth. The night after the wedding, Jamie found himself walking aimlessly through the streets, the glow of street lamps casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks. He had no suitcase, no money, not even the comfort of a kind word from his family. All he carried was the memory of the church doors closing in his face and the sound of his father's condemnation echoing in his ears. With nowhere to turn, he curled up beneath the overhang of a closed store, his suit still pressed from the ceremony, though now wrinkled and dusted with the grime of the pavement. The confetti that had fallen around his shoes that morning clung stubbornly to his jacket, mocking the celebration that excluded him. Days turned into weeks. He tried sleeping in shelters, sometimes on park benches when no bed was available. He learned quickly how the world treated those without a home, suspicious glances from strangers, harsh words from shopkeepers, the constant ache of hunger gnawing at his stomach. The humiliation of being thrown out by his family was compounded by the indignities of survival. He took small jobs when he could find them, washing dishes in diners, stocking shelves overnight, cleaning floors no one else wanted to touch. His hands blistered, his back ached, but the pay barely covered food. Yet, in the silence of those long nights, one thread of connection remained. Adrian, though he could not stand beside him openly, Adrian sent brief messages, words of encouragement written carefully so no one else would discover them. Sometimes it was just a line, "Hold on." Other times it was longer, recalling moments they once shared in quiet corners, away from watchful eyes. Those notes became lifelines. Jamie never responded, fearing discovery would bring Adrian punishment too. but he kept each message folded in his pocket until the paper wore thin. Time did not erase his pain, but it sharpened his resilience. When he landed a position with a small catering company, it became the first step towards something more. He realized he had a gift not only for hard work, but for envisioning how spaces could feel alive, how lights, flowers, and music could weave into an atmosphere that made people forget their burdens. Clients noticed his dedication, then his creativity. Soon, he was given more responsibility, designing layouts, suggesting details others overlooked. What began as a way to pay rent became a calling. Jamie poured his soul into every event he touched, determined to give strangers what he himself had been denied, the feeling of belonging, of being celebrated without condition. His designs grew more ambitious, his reputation spread, and with each success, he rebuilt pieces of the dignity his family had stripped from him. Still, the wound remained. Every joyful wedding he organized reminded him of the one day that had broken him, the day love was twisted into shame. But he refused to let that be the end of his story. Adrian remained a distant flame, one Jamie never reached for, but never forgot. Though their paths did not cross, the thought of him walking freely somewhere in the same world gave Jamie strength. In every centerpiece arranged and every hall transformed, he imagined creating spaces where people like them could exist openly, without fear. The years of exile taught Jamie something his father's sermons never had. Family is not proven by blood or tradition, but by the hands that lift you when you fall and the voices that remind you your life has value. He carried that truth with him, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a quiet guide. Out of rejection grew resilience, and from resilience, a new kind of purpose. Years passed, and the boy cast out in shame was no longer the same. Jamie's name had become quietly respected in New York's circles of influence. His work no longer belonged to the shadows of catering halls, but to the glittering lights of city ballrooms. He had transformed fundraising dinners for hospitals, galas for universities, and anniversaries for philanthropic foundations into experiences people remembered for years. Journalists wrote about his instinct for detail, his ability to capture the essence of a cause in every flower arrangement, every note of music, every light falling on polished marble floors. Clients said he had a way of making guests feel that the event was created just for them. What they did not know was that Jamie built each celebration as if he were rewriting his own history, crafting moments of acceptance for others that he never received himself. When an influential charity asked him to oversee their annual fundraising gala at the Metropolitan Hall, it felt like recognition on a scale he had only dreamed of. The hall was vast, its chandeliers heavy with crystals, the kind of stage that could cement reputations. Jamie worked tirelessly, drawing sketches late into the night, adjusting colors, rearranging tables, making sure every corner reflected dignity and beauty. For him, this was more than a contract. It was proof that the boy once thrown onto the street could stand at the center of society's most admired rooms. The evening arrived. Dignitaries, business leaders, and artists filled the space, their voices rising in waves of laughter and conversation. Jamie watched from the side, checking details with the quiet pride of someone who had poured his soul into the night. Then his gaze froze. Across the room stood Aaron, older now. His once youthful sharpness softened, but his posture still proud. Beside him, his wife clutched a small purse, her eyes scanning the grandeur with admiration. They had come as guests, unaware that the gala they entered carried the fingerprints of the brother they had abandoned. Jamie's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the collision of past and present. And then, as if fate wished to test the strength he had built, another familiar figure appeared. Adrian, no longer the best man in a borrowed suit, but a man whose presence commanded respect. He wore a tailored jacket, carried himself with quiet authority, and when their eyes met, years dissolved in a single instant. The same unspoken connection lingered, only now sharpened by maturity and the knowledge of everything they had endured apart. Aaron noticed too. His face tightened when he realized the man responsible for the night's elegance was none other than the twin he had cast away. The shock spread across his wife's features as whispers began to ripple. Some guests recognized Jamie from recent magazine features and approached him with congratulations. Cameras flashed. In that swirl of recognition, Aaron's silence became a burden, one he could no longer hide behind. Jamie did not step forward to confront him. He didn't need to. The contrast spoke for itself. While Aaron lived within the shelter of tradition, Jamie had carved a life from rejection, turning scars into art. Adrian's presence only deepened the weight of the moment. Though no words passed between them, the air was thick with an unfinished story, one now illuminated under the chandeliers of a hall filled with witnesses. That night was more than a reunion. It was a mirror held to a family that had tried to erase him, and it was proof that erasure fails when a person refuses to surrender their worth. Jamie left the gala with the quiet realization that success is not measured by applause or the size of the room, but by the ability to walk back into places where you were once unwelcome and know you no longer need their approval to exist. His journey reminded anyone watching that dignity is not granted by family or society, it is reclaimed, piece by piece, by refusing to let rejection dictate the shape of your future. The gala had ended, but its ripples continued to spread. Guests carried away not just photographs and donation pledges, but the image of Jamie standing in a room that once would have been closed to him. For Aaron and his parents, that night was not triumph but exposure. They returned home shaken, confronted with whispers about the twin they had cast aside now being praised by the very society they long sought approval from. And it did not stop there. Invitations for Jamie multiplied. Articles celebrated his rise from hardship to success. He was no longer a shadow in their past, he had become a name people admired openly. The tension reached its peak when another high-profile event brought them together again. Jamie had been asked to oversee a cultural gala attended by officials, philanthropists, and journalists. He moved through the hall calmly, his presence no longer hesitant, but certain. Then the confrontation came. His parents approached, their expressions strained, voices clipped with accusation. They claimed he had humiliated them twice, first at the wedding by exposing his nature, and now by parading it in front of the world. They spoke of family honor, of disgrace carried into newspapers, of how he had turned his life into an act of defiance rather than reconciliation. Aaron joined, his tone sharp, accusing Jamie of using success to exact revenge, of twisting every achievement into a reminder of their failure as a family. For him, the sight of his twin thriving was not inspiration, but a wound he could not admit to. He saw in Jamie a mirror of what he might have been, and the reflection burned. But this time, Jamie did not shrink back. He did not lower his head or search for approval. In the middle of the grand hall, with cameras poised and guests lingering nearby, he turned toward Adrian, who had remained close but quiet, and reached for his hand, fingers interlocked. The gesture was steady, unshaken, a declaration stronger than any speech. A silence fell, brief but powerful. Before it was broken by applause, guests who had no part in the family's quarrel nevertheless recognized courage when they saw it. Some clapped softly, others stood, their approval spreading like a tear-stekit. Journalists captured the moment, and by the next day, images of Jamie and Adrian standing together became a symbol far larger than family disagreement. Headlines spoke of resilience, of love unhidden, of a man once cast out now leading with pride. The family's outrage was swallowed by the noise of public admiration. They had tried to write Jamie out of their story, but now the world insisted on including him. For Aaron and his parents, it was an uncomfortable spotlight. For Jamie, it was not about revenge, but truth. He had carried silence long enough, and breaking it felt less like rebellion and more like finally breathing. The lesson of that night was not lost on those who witnessed it. Silence protects tradition, but truth transforms lives. Jamie showed that standing beside the person you love, even when the cost is high, gives others permission to do the same. In a hall filled with strangers, he proved that dignity is not granted. It is claimed by the simple act of refusing to hide. The fallout from the gala lingered in headlines, but behind closed doors, the deeper story unfolded. Days later, in a quieter gathering away from the noise of cameras, Adrian finally broke the silence he had carried for years. His voice did not shake, though the words weighed heavy. He confessed that on the day of Aaron's wedding, when Jamie's glance had betrayed him, his own heart had already chosen. He had loved Jamie then, standing in that church, watching him be thrown out while duty forced him to remain still. The guilt of silence had followed him every day since. To admit it now was both a release and a reckoning. Jamie listened, not with anger but with the deep understanding of someone who had lived long with unspoken truths. He did not ask why Adrian had not stood up that day. He already knew the answer. Fear binds people just as tightly as love, and sometimes it takes years for courage to grow. In that moment, the past was not undone, but it was finally acknowledged. An acknowledgement, more than apology, was the beginning of healing. Their reunion stirred more than whispers of romance. It stirred the family itself. Aaron, who had carried resentment louder than reason, was forced to witness something he had never expected. The brother he had scorned was not seeking revenge, but standing firm in a love that predated his anger. And then Jamie revealed what none of them could have imagined. Quietly, without recognition, he had been funding a scholarship under a foundation's name. The recipient was Aaron's daughter. While Aaron lived unaware, Jamie ensured the child would have opportunities unshaken by family pride or prejudice. He had not abandoned blood, even when blood abandoned him. The revelation silenced the room more deeply than any argument. For Aaron, it was a humbling blow. For his parents, it was a mirror they could not look away from. There were no dramatic apologies, no instant transformations. Change rarely arrives in perfect form. But in the faces of those who once exiled him, Jamie saw something shift: shame breaking through stubbornness, recognition softening the edges of pride. His father's eyes filled with tears not spoken through sermons, but through the quiet surrender of a man realizing that faith without compassion had failed his own son. The story that began with rejection ended not in triumph over enemies, but in the gentle victory of forgiveness. Jamie had not only reclaimed his dignity, he had shown that love can stretch beyond bitterness, that choosing kindness over vengeance is the ultimate defiance against cruelty. He did not erase the scars of the past, but he refused to let them dictate the future. And so, in the very place where he was once silenced, Jamie became a voice not just for himself, but for anyone told that love makes them unworthy. His journey asked a question larger than family honor. What would the world look like if we chose compassion where others chose condemnation? If Jamie's story moved you, imagine how many more voices deserve to be heard. Would you have the courage to stand with love in the face of rejection? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe to Heartstories, where stories of resilience, truth, and love continue to shine light into places once covered by silence.